The year was 2487, and humanity had spread far beyond Earth. Hundreds of colonies dotted distant worlds across dozens of star systems. People farmed alien soil, built cities under foreign suns, and raised their children on planets their grandparents had never dreamed of. The Terran Collective governed all of it, a massive but loosely connected union of worlds held together by trade, shared culture, and one unspoken rule that every human understood in their bones: protect the children at all costs. On a green and beautiful frontier world called Verdana IV, a small colony of about 1,200 people lived a quiet life. The planet was lush, covered in rolling plains of blue-green grass and thick forests filled with trees that hummed softly when the wind blew through them. Rivers cut through wide valleys, and the sky turned a deep gold every evening. It was the kind of place people came to when they wanted peace. Sam Castillo was the colony's chief engineer. He was a tall man in his late 30s, with rough hands and tired eyes. He spent most of his days fixing water pumps, maintaining the power grid, and making sure the settlement kept running. His wife, Grace, ran the colony's only school. She taught every subject to every age group, from basic reading to biology, and she did it all in a single large building near the center of town. 46 children attended her classes, and she knew every one of them by name. Their son Danny was 7 years old. He had messy brown hair and a gap-toothed smile, and he never stopped moving. He ran everywhere, asked 1,000 questions a day, and thought every bug and rock on Verdana IV was the most interesting thing in the universe. His older sister Lily was 12. She was quieter and more serious. She liked drawing and reading, and she kept a journal where she sketched the strange plants and animals they found near the river. She watched over Danny like a second mother, which sometimes annoyed him and sometimes made him feel safe. That afternoon, Danny and Lily were playing near the river with a group of other colony children. Cole Whitman, a skinny 10-year-old with freckles, was trying to catch something that looked like a blue frog. Twin girls named Bea and June Aldrich sat on the bank braiding each other's hair. A few younger kids splashed in the shallows, while Lily sat on a rock and sketched the tree line. It was a perfect day, the kind of day that felt like it would last forever. That evening, as the gold sky darkened into violet, strange lights appeared above the colony. They were faint at first, pale green flickers high up in the atmosphere. People stepped out of their homes and looked up. Sam stood on his porch, with Grace beside him, and watched. The lights moved in slow, deliberate patterns, nothing like meteors or satellites. Sam went inside and contacted the orbiting Terran patrol frigate, the Steadfast. Commander Nina Hale answered from the bridge. She was a sharp woman in her 40s, with short silver hair and a reputation for staying calm in any situation. She told Sam there was no scheduled traffic in the sector. No ships had requested approach clearance. She promised to run a full scan and get back to him. By morning, the lights were gone. Commander Hale reported that her sensors had picked up faint energy signatures at the edge of the system, but nothing conclusive. She increased patrols and told Sam to keep his people alert. 3 days later, a Velzari diplomatic shuttle descended through the clouds and landed just outside the colony. The Velzari were a species humanity had known about for nearly a decade. They were tall. Most stood over 7 feet, with hard, dark exoskeletons that looked like polished black glass. Their eyes were large and multifaceted, like an insect's, and they communicated through a combination of clicks, hisses, and translated speech devices mounted on their throats. They controlled a cluster of star systems not far from human space. Their empire was old, proud, and aggressive. Diplomatic relations between humans and the Velzari had always been tense, held together by a fragile non-aggression treaty that neither side fully trusted. The leader of the envoy was a figure called Archon Cyrac. He was taller than the rest, with deep grooves etched into his exoskeleton like ritual scars. His voice, filtered through the translator, was smooth and polite, but there was something cold underneath it. He requested permission to conduct scientific surveys on Verdana 4. He said the Velzhari were studying unique mineral deposits and plant biology. Nothing invasive. Sam didn't like it. Neither did most of the colony council. But the non-aggression treaty included provisions for mutual scientific cooperation, and refusing outright could create a diplomatic incident. After a long debate, the council agreed to let the Velzhari stay under strict conditions. They were to remain within designated survey zones far from the settlement. They were not to approach civilian areas. They were to report their findings to the council weekly. Archon Sirac agreed to every condition with a slow nod and a thin clicking sound that might have been a smile. Over the following days, the Velzhari set up a small camp about 15 kilometers north of the colony. They were quiet and kept to themselves. A few colonists reported seeing them moving through the forest at odd hours, but nothing alarming happened. Grace told Sam she felt uneasy, but she couldn't say exactly why. Sam told her to trust the process, but quietly asked Commander Hale to keep a closer eye on the Velzhari camp from orbit. Lily noticed something too. One evening, while walking back from the river, she saw a Velzhari standing at the edge of the tree line near the colony's outer fence. It was motionless, watching the playground where the younger children had been running around just an hour earlier. Its large, dark eyes reflected the last light of the setting sun. Lily felt a chill crawl up her spine. She grabbed Danny's hand and walked home fast, without looking back. She told her father what she saw. Sam frowned, but said it was probably nothing. The Velzhari were just curious about humans. Different species had different social behaviors. He told her not to worry. But that night, long after the colony had gone to sleep, Archon Sirac stood inside his camp and opened a secure, encrypted channel to a Velzhari battlecruiser waiting in deep space just beyond the system's sensor range. "The settlement is small and poorly defended," he said. "One frigate in orbit. No ground military presence of note. The specimens are young, healthy, and plentiful. Begin preparations for collection." The channel closed. The night was silent, and in their beds across the colony, 46 children slept without any idea of what was coming for them. 3 weeks passed, and life on Verdana 4 continued as it always had. The mornings were cool and bright. The children went to school. The farmers worked the fields. The Velzhari stayed in their camp to the north and filed their weekly survey reports on time. Everything seemed fine on the surface, but underneath it, something felt wrong. People couldn't explain it. It was like the air before a storm, heavy and still and waiting. Cole Whitman was the first to disappear. He had gone on a nature hike with 2 older boys along a trail about a kilometer east of the settlement. The older boys walked ahead while Cole lagged behind, stopping to poke at interesting rocks the way he always did. When they turned around to call him, he was gone. Just gone. His water bottle was on the ground. His jacket was folded neatly on a rock, as if someone had placed it there. But Cole was nowhere. The colony organized a search party within the hour. 30 adults spread out through the forest, calling his name until their voices went hoarse. They searched through the night, using flashlights and thermal scanners. They found nothing. Not a footprint, not a thread of clothing, not a sound. Grace held Cole's mother, a woman named Patty Whitman, while she sobbed on the floor of the school building. Sam stood outside with a grim face and told everyone to stay calm. Maybe the boy had wandered off and gotten lost. Maybe he had fallen into a cave or a ravine. They would keep looking. 2 days later, Bee and June Aldrich disappeared from their family homestead on the outer edge of the colony. Their parents woke up in the morning and found the girls' beds empty. The window was open. The air outside smelled faintly of something sharp and chemical, like burnt metal. Their father ran screaming through the settlement. Their mother couldn't speak for hours. Now there was panic. 3 children gone in less than a week. Parents refused to let their kids outside. Grace shut down the school and turned it into a crisis center. Sam sent an urgent message to Commander Hale on the Steadfast, requesting immediate ground support. Hale responded fast. She sent down a detachment of Terran Marines, led by Sergeant Eli Rowan. Eli was 34 years old, with a square jaw, close-cropped dark hair, and a scar that ran from his left ear to his chin. He had served in 3 border conflicts and had seen things that still kept him awake at night. But he was steady, he was precise, and he had a reputation among his squad for one thing above all else. He would walk into fire for a civilian without thinking twice, especially if that civilian was a child. Eli and his team of 12 Marines swept the areas around each disappearance site with military-grade scanning equipment. At Cole's last known location, they found faint chemical traces on the rocks and soil. The chemicals matched Velzari biological signatures, enzymes and pheromone markers that were unique to the species. The same traces were found outside the Aldrich homestead near the open window. Sam's face went white when he read the report. He walked to the Velzari camp with Eli and 4 armed Marines at his side. Archon Cyrak met them at the perimeter of the camp with his usual calm, clicking demeanor. Sam held up the report and asked him directly, had the Velzari taken the children? Cyrak's multifaceted eyes reflected Sam's face back at him in 100 tiny fragments. The Archon tilted his head slowly and said through his translator that the accusation was offensive and baseless. He said the chemical traces could have come from the survey equipment his team had used in the area weeks earlier. He reminded Sam that the Velzari were guests operating under a legal treaty, and that making threats against a diplomatic envoy would have serious consequences. Sam stared at him for a long time. Eli stood behind Sam with his hand resting on his sidearm and said nothing. They turned and walked back to the colony. That night, Sam doubled the perimeter guard. Every adult who could hold a weapon was given one. Floodlights were set up around the settlement's outer fence. Parents slept in their children's rooms. The colony was locked down tight. It wasn't enough. At 3 a.m, the floodlights went dead. Every one of them, all at once, as if someone had cut the power. But the power grid was still running. The lights had been disabled by some kind of targeted electromagnetic pulse that affected only the perimeter systems. Then the screaming started. It came from everywhere at once, from homes on the north side, from the dormitory near the school, from the small cluster of family units along the eastern fence. Shadows moved between buildings. Tall, dark shapes with gleaming exoskeletons slipped through doorways and windows with terrifying speed and silence. They carried devices that released a fine mist, and any adult who breathed it collapsed into unconsciousness within seconds. The children were pulled from their beds. Some were already asleep. Others woke up and cried, and reached for their parents who lay motionless on the floor. The Velzari moved with cold mechanical precision. They did not speak. They did not hesitate. Lily Castillo woke up to the sound of Danny screaming. She ran from her room and saw 2 Velzari carrying her brother through the back door of their home. Danny's arms were reaching toward her. His face was red and streaked with tears. He was calling her name over and over. Lily ran after them. She burst through the door and into the dark. She saw a cloaked shuttle sitting in the field behind their house, its engines humming with a low, vibrating sound. The Velzari were loading children into it, small, struggling figures silhouetted against the faint green glow of the shuttle's interior. She saw Danny being passed up through the hatch. She screamed. She screamed louder than she had ever screamed in her life. She ran toward the shuttle, but a blast of air from the engines knocked her off her feet. The hatch closed. The shuttle lifted off the ground, shimmered and vanished into the black sky like it had never been there at all. Lily lay on the cold grass, staring up at the stars, and kept screaming until her voice broke. When the sun rose, the colony counted the damage. 14 children were gone. 14. The youngest was 5. The oldest was 12. Danny Castillo, Cole Whitman, Bea and June Aldrich, and 10 others. Every parent who had been sprayed with the mist woke up with splitting headaches and the worst realization of their lives. Grace sat on the floor of Danny's empty room and held his pillow against her chest and did not move or speak. Sam stood outside with his fists clenched so tightly that his nails drew blood from his palms. His eyes were dry. His jaw was locked. He looked like a man who had just crossed a line inside himself that he could never come back from. He walked to the communications array and sent a Priority 1 distress signal through the quantum link relay to Terran Collective High Command on Earth. The message was short. It contained the details of the abduction, the number of children taken, and the confirmed Velhari involvement. Sergeant Eli Rowan found Lily sitting alone on the back porch, staring at the spot where the shuttle had been. Her eyes were swollen and empty. She was shaking. Eli sat down beside her and said nothing for a long time. Then he put his arm around her, and she leaned into him and cried until she had nothing left. His face was hard and still, and something dark and certain burned behind his eyes. "They have no idea what they just started," he said quietly. And across the void of space, the message raced toward Earth at the speed of light, carrying with it the fury of every parent, every soldier, and every human being who would hear it. The message from Verdana 4 reached Earth in 6 hours through the Quantum Link Relay Network. It arrived at Terran Collective High Command at 0417 station time, and was flagged immediately as Priority 1. A young communications officer read it twice, then 3 times, stood up from her desk with a pale face, and walked it directly to the duty commander. Within 30 minutes, it had reached the desk of Admiral Connie Sharp. Connie Sharp was 61 years old. She had served in the Terran Navy for 38 of those years. She had commanded destroyers, cruisers, carrier groups, and now the entire 7th Fleet, one of humanity's largest and most powerful military formations. She was known for her patience, her sharp mind, and her ability to keep emotion out of tactical decisions. She had negotiated ceasefires and ordered strikes with the same steady voice. People called her the Iron Compass because she never lost direction, no matter how bad the storm. She was also a grandmother. She had 5 grandchildren. The oldest was 11. The youngest was 4. She read the distress signal from Verdana 4, sitting alone in her office aboard the flagship Iron Cradle. She read it once, slowly, word by word. When she finished, she set the datapad down on her desk and sat very still for a long time. Her hands, resting flat on the surface, trembled slightly, not from fear, not from shock, from a cold, focused, deeply controlled anger that settled into her chest like iron cooling in a mold. She pressed the fleet-wide communication channel. "All ships, all stations," she said. Her voice was calm and clear. "This is Admiral Sharp. Effective immediately, the 7th Fleet is at war footing. All leave is cancelled. All vessels are to begin combat preparations. Captains will receive tactical briefings within the hour. We move before the day is out." She paused. Then she added, "They took our children." She didn't need to say anything else. The channel exploded with activity. Every ship in the 7th Fleet began powering weapons, recalling crew, and loading supplies. No one asked questions. No one hesitated. The words alone were enough. On Earth, the news spread fast. It moved through military channels first, then government offices, then media networks. By noon, every human world in the collective knew what had happened on Verdana 4. The reaction was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. President Leo Garrett addressed the Terran Collective Senate that afternoon. He was a tall man in his early 50s, with a calm, careful way of speaking that usually made people feel reassured. Today, his voice carried a weight that filled the enormous Senate chamber like thunder. He laid out the facts plainly. 14 human children had been taken from their homes by Velzari forces. The abduction was deliberate, planned, and carried out under the cover of a diplomatic visit. The children's current status was unknown. Then, he issued an ultimatum. The Velzari had 48 standard hours to return every child, alive and unharmed, to Verdana 4. If they failed to do so, the Terran Collective would consider the abduction an act of war. Not a border dispute, not a diplomatic incident, an act of war against the human species. The Senate voted. The result was unanimous. Every single senator from every single human world voted in favor of military action if the deadline passed. There was no debate. There were no dissenting voices. The vote took less than 4 minutes. Across human space, the response went far beyond the military. On the mining world of Korath 2, 300 civilian cargo pilots volunteered their ships to carry supplies to the front. On the factory moon of Helios, production lines that built farming equipment were retooled overnight to manufacture ammunition. On Earth itself, retired soldiers, some of them in their 70s and 80s, showed up at recruitment stations and demanded to serve. They were told they were too old. They refused to leave. Ordinary people held vigils. They lit candles outside government buildings. They put photographs of the missing children on every screen and every wall. Mothers and fathers who had never met the families of Verdana 4 wept openly because the fear was universal. Every parent in the collective looked at those 14 faces and saw their own child. Humanity had many divisions: political, cultural, economic. People argued about taxes and trade routes and territorial rights. But there was one line that no argument could cross, one law that was not written in any book but was understood by every single human being who had ever lived. You do not hurt the children. You do not take the children. And if you do, there is no force in the universe that will protect you from what comes next. The ultimatum reached the Velzari High Council on their throne world of Kadrath within hours. Empress Kethara, the supreme ruler of the Velzari Empire, received it in her war chamber, surrounded by her generals and advisors. She was ancient by Velzari standards. Her exoskeleton was pale and cracked with age, but her eyes were sharp and her mind was ruthless. She had built the empire through conquest and intimidation. She had crushed rebellions, absorbed weaker species, and expanded Velzari territory for over a century. She listened to the human ultimatum and made a sound that her translator rendered as laughter. 48 hours, she said to her generals. The softskins give us 48 hours, as if time belongs to them. She waved a clawed hand dismissively. They are emotional creatures. They shout and wave their fists, and then they do nothing. Their military is spread thin across too many worlds. Their ships are fast, but fragile. They do not have the will for a true war. Her intelligence advisors agreed. Their reports showed the Terran fleet scattered across multiple sectors. Their analysts estimated that it would take weeks for humanity to assemble a meaningful strike force. By then, the Velzari could fortify their borders and make any attack too costly to attempt. Empress Kethara gave the order. The 14 children would not be returned. Instead, they would be transported to a high-security research facility on Kadrath itself, deep underground, where Velzari scientists would study their biology, their neural development, and their genetic structure. The Empress believed that understanding human young would give the Velzari an advantage in future conflicts. Children were just resources, she reasoned. Small, weak, and youthful only for what could be extracted from them. The children were loaded onto a fast transport ship under heavy guard and sent to Kadrath. Danny Castillo sat in a cold metal cell beside Cole Whitman and the Aldrich twins. The younger children were crying. The older ones stared at the walls in silence. None of them knew where they were going. All of them wanted to go home. The 48 hours passed. On the bridge of the Iron Cradle, Admiral Connie Sharp stood at the Central Command Console. Her fleet was assembled and ready. 340 warships, from nimble frigates to massive dreadnoughts, crewed by men and women who had not slept in 2 days and did not care. Every eye on the bridge was on her. She received the final confirmation from High Command. The deadline had expired. No response from the Velzari. No children returned. She looked at the star map, showing Velzari space and the blinking indicators of her fleet. She gave one word: advance. 340 ships jumped to hyperspace. Behind them, 3 more fleets were already mobilizing. Across human space, every shipyard, every military base, and every colony defense force was activating. The largest military operation in human history was underway. And at its heart, driving every ship and every soldier forward, was a fury so pure and so simple that no Velzari analyst had ever thought to account for it. They had taken the children, and now the whole species was coming to get them back. The Terran's 7th Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Velzari territory, like a fist breaking through a wall. 340 warships appeared on Velzari sensors all at once, and every border monitoring station that saw them sent the same panicked message back to Kadrath: the humans are here. But the 7th Fleet was not alone. Within 12 hours, the 3rd Fleet arrived from the Spinward colonies. Then the 9th Fleet jumped in from the Outer Rim. Then the 12th Fleet, pulled all the way from Deep Space Patrol, dropped into formation beside them. Over 1,100 warships hung in the darkness at the edge of Velzari space, the largest human armada ever assembled in one place at one time. Aboard the Iron Cradle, Admiral Connie Sharp stood at the tactical display and studied the map of Velzari territory. She had not slept in 3 days. Her eyes were red and her face was drawn, but her mind was sharp as a blade. She had spent every waking hour planning this operation with her staff. And now the plan was set. 3 prongs, 3 objectives, 1 purpose. The first prong was the Hammer, a fast strike force of 200 ships, led by Captain Vince Nolan, aboard the destroyer Black Point, hit the Velzari forward bases along the border. These bases were the backbone of the Velzari military supply network. Fuel depots, ammunition stores, communication relays, and staging areas for their fleet. The strike force tore through them in hours. The Velzari had expected a cautious, measured human response. What they got was something else entirely. Human captains pushed their ships beyond safe operational limits. They flew into firing ranges that tactical doctrine said were suicidal. They absorbed hits that should have crippled them, and kept fighting. One frigate, the Dawnbreak, lost half its hull plating in an exchange with a Velzari weapons platform, and rammed the platform directly rather than pull back. The crew evacuated into escape pods seconds before impact. The platform was destroyed. This was not how humans were supposed to fight. Velzari commanders sent confused reports back to Kadrath. The humans were not behaving rationally. They were taking losses that no sane military force would accept, and they were winning. The second prong was the Scalpel. While the Hammer smashed the Velzari border defenses, a single stealth transport slipped through the chaos and made its way deep into enemy territory, heading straight for Kadrath. Inside that transport were 20 Terran Marines, hand-picked for the most important mission of the entire war. Sergeant Eli Rowan led them. He had volunteered the moment the mission was announced. His commanding officer had told him the odds of survival were less than 30%. Eli had looked at her and said, "I don't care about the odds. Those kids are waiting for someone to come get them, and I told one of their sisters I would." The transport landed on the dark side of Kadrath, in a rocky valley 3 kilometers from the underground research facility where the children were being held. Eli and his team moved on foot through the alien landscape, jagged black rock under a sky full of unfamiliar stars. They wore light armor for speed and carried close-quarters weapons. Every one of them knew this was likely a one-way trip. None of them slowed down. They reached the facility at 0300 local time. It was built into the side of a mountain, with heavy blast doors and automated defense turrets. Eli's tech specialist, a young woman named Karen Page, hacked the outer security grid in under 4 minutes. The team moved in. The inside of the facility was cold and sterile, lit by harsh white lights that hummed with a frequency that made human teeth ache. The corridors were narrow and designed for Velzari proportions. Tall ceilings, but tight spaces. Eli's team moved through them in pairs, clearing each room with practiced precision. They met resistance almost immediately. Velzari guards, armed with plasma rifles, came at them from side corridors and elevated walkways. The fighting was brutal and close. In the tight spaces, there was no room for tactics, only speed and violence. Eli fired his weapon with one hand and used the other to drag a wounded Marine behind cover. The sounds of gunfire and alien shrieks echoed off the metal walls. 3 Marines fell in the first 10 minutes. Private Cody Allen was hit by a plasma bolt that went through his chest plate. He died on the floor of a corridor 200 meters from the detention block. Corporal Nina Falk took a blast meant for the Marine beside her and did not get up. Private Jake Dorsey held a doorway alone for 90 seconds while the rest of the team pushed forward, and a Velzari blade found the gap in his armor. Eli did not stop. He could not stop. Every second those children spent in this place was a second too long. They reached the detention level. A long hallway lined with glass-fronted containment cells stretched out before them. And there, inside those cells, were the children. 14 small faces stared out through the glass. Some were sleeping on bare metal beds. Some were sitting, with their knees drawn up to their chests. Some were crying silently. They were alive. All of them were alive. Danny Castillo was standing at the glass of his cell, with his hands pressed flat against it. His eyes were wide, and his face was thin and pale. But when he saw Eli walking down the corridor in his battered, blood-streaked armor, something broke open in the boy's expression. His lips trembled, and tears ran down his cheeks, and he whispered, "You came." Eli reached the cell. The locking mechanism was Velzari technology, complex and unfamiliar. He didn't bother trying to hack it. He pulled out his plasma cutter, jammed it into the seam of the door, and burned through the lock with his bare hands on the housing. The metal glowed red. His gloves smoked. The door popped open. Danny threw himself into Eli's arms. The boy was shaking so hard, his whole body vibrated. Eli held him tight and said, "I got you, kid. You're going home." The team moved fast after that. They opened every cell. Karen carried the youngest child, a 5-year-old girl named Maisie Grant, who had stopped speaking days ago, and now clung to Karen's neck without making a sound. 2 Marines each took a child on their backs. Eli carried Danny on one side and Cole Whitman on the other. They fought their way back out. The Velzari sent reinforcements, but Eli's team had something the Velzari could not match. They were carrying the reason they were fighting. Every Marine in that corridor would have died 10 times over before letting a single child be taken again. They moved through gunfire and smoke and the screams of dying Velzari guards, and they did not stop until they reached the surface. The stealth transport was waiting. The pilot, a man named Greg Lowe, had kept the engines running and the ramp down. He saw Eli come out of the mountain, carrying 2 children, bleeding from a wound in his side, and said only, "Everyone accounted for?" 14 kids, 17 Marines, Eli said. His voice was hoarse. 3 didn't make it. Greg closed the ramp and launched the transport into the sky. The third prong was the storm. While Eli's team extracted the children, the main Terran fleet advanced directly toward Kadrath. Every Velzari defense station, orbital platform, and warship between the border and the homeworld was engaged and destroyed. The Velzari fought back, but their fleets had been built to bully weaker species into submission, not to face an enemy that was willing to burn everything to reach them. Ship after ship fell. Velzari commanders who had spent decades believing their empire was untouchable watched their formations crumble. The humans did not pause. They did not negotiate. They did not offer terms. They simply kept coming. Empress Cathara stood in her war chamber and watched the tactical display turn red. Her orbital defense ring, which she had once called the unbreakable shield of Kadrath, was gone in under 6 hours. Her fleet was scattered or destroyed. Human warships filled the sky above her world like a steel sky. She sent a desperate hail to Admiral Sharp. Her voice, for the first time in her long life, carried something that sounded like fear. She offered a ceasefire. She offered to negotiate. She offered to return the children. Admiral Sharp's response was broadcast on an open channel, so that every Velzari on the planet could hear it. "You had 48 hours, she said. "You used them to hurt our children. We are done talking." The channel closed. The fleet moved into bombardment position. And Empress Kethera, for the first time in over a century of conquest and power, understood what it felt like to be prey. The Terran fleets surrounded Kadrath. Over 1,000 warships hung in orbit above the Velzari homeworld, their weapons charged and aimed at the surface. From the bridge of the Iron Cradle, Admiral Connie Sharp looked down at the planet through the viewport, a dark, rocky world covered in sprawling cities and industrial complexes, home to billions of Velzari lives. She had a choice to make. There were voices in the fleet calling for total destruction. They wanted Kadrath turned to glass. They wanted every city burned, every structure flattened, every trace of the Velzari Empire wiped from the galaxy. The fury was real, and it was deep, and Sharp understood it. She felt it herself. She had seen the medical reports from the rescue transport. The children had been perked, scanned, sampled, and kept in cold cells for days. Danny Castillo had bruises on his arms where needles had been pushed in. Maisie Grant, the 5-year-old, still hadn't spoken a word. These were not statistics. These were children. But Connie Sharp had not spent 38 years in uniform to become the thing she was fighting against. She opened a channel to the fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Sharp. I know what many of you want to do. I know why you want to do it. I feel the same way. But we are not them. We did not come here to exterminate a species. We came here to make sure they can never do this again, to our children or to anyone else's." She gave the order. The bombardment would be targeted and precise. Every Velzari military installation on Kadrath and across their empire would be destroyed. Every shipyard, every weapons factory, every orbital defense station, every command center, every military academy. The infrastructure of war would be erased, but the civilian population would be spared. Homes, hospitals, food production centers, water systems, these would not be touched. The Velzari people would live. They would simply never again have the power to threaten anyone. The bombardment began and lasted 72 hours. Across Velzari space, human ships carried out coordinated strikes on military targets with surgical accuracy. Shipyards that had taken decades to build were reduced to rubble in minutes. Weapons factories that had supplied the Velzari war machine for over a century were turned to craters. Orbital platforms that had once projected the Empire's power across the stars fell from the sky like burning stars. On Tadrath, the Imperial Palace was leveled. Empress Cathara and her war council were captured by a marine detachment and taken into custody. The Empress, dragged from the ruins of her throne room, looked at the human soldiers around her and said nothing. For the first time in her very long life, she had no words. When the bombardment ended, the Velzari Empire, as a military power, no longer existed. Their fleets were gone. Their weapons were gone. Their ability to project force beyond their own atmosphere was gone. They were, in the span of 3 days, reduced from one of the most feared empires in the sector to a disarmed and occupied civilization. President Leo Garrett addressed the galactic community from Earth. His speech was broadcast on every frequency, in every language, to every known species with the technology to receive it. He announced that the Velzari Empire was formally dissolved. Their territory would be monitored by Terran peacekeeping forces. Their remaining government would be restructured under supervision. Empress Cathara and her military leadership would face trial for crimes against humanity, specifically the kidnapping and abuse of children. Then he made the distinction that mattered. "We did not destroy the Velzari people," he said. "Their homes stand. Their families are intact. Their children are safe. We want the galaxy to understand this clearly. Humanity does not seek conquest. We do not take pleasure in destruction, but we have one law that is older than our governments, older than our nations, older than our history. You do not harm our children. This is not a policy. It is not a treaty. It is who we are. And any species that forgets this will be reminded." The speech was replayed millions of times across hundreds of worlds. Other species, some of whom had watched the entire conflict unfold from a safe distance, took note. Diplomatic messages poured in. Some expressed admiration, some expressed fear. All of them expressed understanding. On Verdana 4, the children came home. The rescue transport landed on the same field where the Velzari shuttle had taken them. The whole colony was waiting. Every man, woman, and child in the settlement stood in the morning light, silent, holding their breath. The transport's ramp lowered, and the first small figure appeared at the top. It was Danny Castillo. He stood there for a moment, blinking in the sunlight, looking thin and tired, and so much smaller than a 7-year-old should look. Then he saw his mother. Grace Castillo let out a sound that was not quite a word, and not quite a scream. She ran forward and caught Danny as he stumbled down the ramp, and she held him so tight that the world could have ended around them, and she would not have let go. Sam wrapped his arms around both of them, and buried his face in his son's hair. Lily pressed herself against her brother's side, and whispered his name over and over. One by one, the children came down the ramp. Cole Whitman ran to his mother Patty, who dropped to her knees in the dirt and pulled him against her chest. Bea and June Aldrich came out holding hands, and their parents nearly knocked each other over, trying to reach them. Maisie Grant, still silent, was carried down by Karen Page. When Karen set her gently on the ground, and Maisie's father crouched in front of her, the little girl looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Daddy." It was the first word she had spoken in weeks, and it broke every heart that heard it. The colony wept. There was no other word for it. Grown men who had held themselves together for days fell apart. Women who had been strong for everyone else finally let themselves feel it. The sound of crying and laughter and children's names being called filled the air like music. Sergeant Eli Rowan was the last one off the transport. He walked down the ramp slowly, his side bandaged, his armor still stained and scorched. Danny broke away from his parents and ran back to Eli and threw his arms around the Marine's waist. "Thank you for coming to get us," Danny said, his voice muffled against Eli's armor. Eli knelt down so he was eye level with the boy. He put his hand on Danny's head and tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His eyes filled with tears, the first he had shed in years. He nodded and pulled Danny into a gentle hug, and for a moment, the scarred and hardened soldier was just a man, holding a child he had promised to bring home. Commander Hale recommended Eli and his entire team for the Terran Medal of Valor, the highest military honor the collective could bestow. The 3 Marines who had fallen in the facility, Cody Allen, Nina Falk, and Jake Dorsey, were honored with full military funerals. Millions watched the ceremonies across human space. Their names were carved into the memorial wall on Earth, beside the names of every human who had ever given their life to protect others. Admiral Connie Sharp retired 6 months after the conflict. At her farewell ceremony aboard the Iron Cradle, she stood before her officers and crew and spoke briefly. "I have commanded ships and fleets for over 30 years, she said. "I have fought in battles that history books will remember, and battles that no one will ever know about. But the mission to bring those children home was the only one that ever truly mattered." She stepped down from the podium, and the crew of the Iron Cradle gave her a standing ovation that lasted nearly 10 minutes. Life on Verdana 4 slowly returned to normal. The colony rebuilt its school. Grace went back to teaching. Sam went back to fixing things. Danny laughed again, though he sometimes woke up at night calling for his sister. Lily never let him out of her sight for long, and she started a new journal. This one filled not with sketches of alien plants, but with drawings of the people who had brought her brother back. 1 year after the conflict, a delegation from a newly contacted alien species called the Rithani arrived on Earth for their first diplomatic meeting with humanity. They were a quiet, cautious people, tall and thin with soft gray skin and wide, curious eyes. Their ambassador, a figure named Torek, was given a tour of the capital city. As they walked past a park near the embassy, Torek stopped. A group of human children were playing on a grassy hill, running, shouting, chasing each other, tumbling in the sunlight. A little girl was sitting on her father's shoulders, pointing at birds in the sky. A boy was showing his friend a bug he had caught in a jar. Their laughter drifted across the park, like something warm and alive. Then he turned to his aide and asked quietly, "Is it true, what they say about humans and their children?" The aide, who had studied the Velzari incident in great detail, nodded slowly. "It is true. Do not test it." Torek looked back at the children. The little girl on her father's shoulders was waving at him. Without thinking, he waved back. "We would never dream of it," he said softly. And across the galaxy, in the ruins of an empire that had learned the hardest lesson the universe had to teach, the Velzari remembered, and they taught their own children to remember too. There were many dangers in the stars, many threats, many enemies, but there was one species you never ever provoked. Not because they were the strongest, not because they were the smartest, not because their ships were the fastest or their weapons were the most powerful, but because when you hurt their children, they came for you. And they did not stop until it was over.